The Washington Wizards very well might be the most mediocre / below average team in all of the NBA. They're not bad enough to compete for a top 3, top 5, or really even like top 7 draft pick. And they're not good enough to really compete and be a serious playoff team. And they're kind of stuck in the middle. They're stuck in a situation a lot of people call NBA Purgatory. And the question is, this offseason and in their future, they've tried putting different pieces around Bradley Beal. Where do they go from here with Bradley Beal's pending free agency? And after making a lot of moves last offseason, they started off this year really hot and then cooled off a lot. Where do they go from here? In today's video, we will be discussing their situation heading into this offseason, the many decisions they have to make in another one of these offseason team videos that I've really enjoyed making. And obviously for the Wizards, it starts with their main man, who was just short of the scoring title last season, Bradley Beal. Averaged 30 a game last year. This year was not as good, but he's still a really good player. You know, last year his stats kind of suggested he's a superstar, but I don't think he's a superstar. I think he's a star. He's a really good complementary player, but the Wizards have tried building around him, and the most success they've had with Bradley Beal's their 1 year with Russell Westbrook, where they turned their whole season around and were able to make the playoffs as the 8th seed through the play-in. But even in that season, you know, a lot of the year they played some really bad basketball. They started that season with a losing record in the first 30 or so games, and they were very disappointing. Now, obviously, Westbrook isn't here anymore, and they have some decent young players. They have a bunch of forwards on the younger side, but they don't really have a true point guard. They tried signing Spencer Dinwiddie last offseason, and that really did not work out. He was traded mid-season along with Davis Bertans to the Dallas Mavericks for Kristaps Porzingis, who we know is such a talented player. Hurts to say this as a Knicks fan, but we all know the talent is very evident with him, but he just cannot stay healthy, and he's not nearly as physical of a player as he used to be. But we know he's a piece. He is a potential piece on that team. And then you have the young forwards. You have Deni Avdija, who's a good defender, not a great defender. He's a good one. He's been a bit disappointing on the offensive end, not a great shooter. He's a good passer, but a guy like that who's a good passer can't really use his abilities to the full extent, as he doesn't really put that much pressure on the defense. No one's really scared of Deni Avdija's scoring ability. You have Rui Hachimura, who missed a lot of the year. It's kind of confusing what his situation was, but he did play more towards the end, was regaining his form. I believe he was hurt, but that whole situation was a bit confusing. You have Corey Kispert, who I think will be a very solid player. He's a decent young player. I don't think anybody thinks he's going to be something special. I believe he was picked 15th last year in the draft. He was a bit older for a draft prospect, but you have a player there in Corey Kispert who could be a pretty good 3-and-D wing. You have Avdija, who's a big wing, good defender, and has some playmaking skills. And then you have Rui Hachimura, who plays a bit more like a big and kind of back to the basket type of player, but he can get you some buckets for sure. And then you have Kyle Kuzma, who's one of the bright spots for this Wizards team, but in the NBA community, he's kind of like still viewed as a young player. That guy's like 27, so he's a good player, but I mean, my man's entering his prime right now. And I mean, for the Wizards, who after that Porzingis move, it seems clear they are still trying to make the playoffs and be competitive with Bradley Beal, as many are suspecting he will re-sign with the Wizards, as they can offer him more money than anybody else. And he's talked about how he wants to build something in Washington, and there have been so many rumors about him moving away from the team, but I do not think it will happen. So you have Bradley Beal, those wings in Kuzma, Hachimura, Kispert, and Deni Avdija. And then you have Kristaps Porzingis. But what about the rest of the roster in Washington this offseason and their 10th overall pick in this year's draft? What will they do there? Now, there's been some talk the Wizards may look to trade it, make another win now move to build around Porzingis and Bradley Beal. And I think that definitely could make sense. Maybe a guy like Jeremy Grant, who they were rumored with last offseason, who could really, really help the Wizards with his defense and scoring ability and not needing the ball in his hands. But assuming the Wizards do keep the pick, some guys they could look at is Dyson Daniels, a huge Australian point guard who's 6'8" and still growing. Played in the G League this season. Not a great shooter, but he's really rising up draft boards, and really he might not even be there, but the potential is clearly there, and they do need a point guard. Spencer Dinwiddie did not work out in Washington, so he could be an option. Benedict Mathurin could be an option as well as Johnny Davis. They want a wing with some scoring ability and some two-way potential. Both of those guys have that. Davis more of a mid-range scorer, and Mathurin more of a three-point shooter, but both with some real potential. And I think both will be pretty decent right away. And then maybe they want a guy next to Porzingis who's a more physical player, as Porzingis likes to be out on the perimeter. A guy like Jalen Duren or Mark Williams maybe. Another guy Washington could consider if they trade down and look to get more assets is Ty Washington. He's a solid point guard out of Kentucky. His performance took a dip, definitely, after his ankle injury, but he's definitely what I'd call a true point guard, or closer to it than most other guards in this draft. He's a good passer, got a good floater, really good pull-up shooter, but he pretty much declined every aspect of his game after that injury, so teams are really hoping he can return to that form. But point guard's definitely a need for Washington. As I said earlier, Spencer Dinwiddie just really didn't work out with the Wizards, and I definitely think in free agency that's going to be their main goal, because at that 10 draft spot in this year's class, there really aren't a lot of guys that can give you quality point guard minutes, especially right away, or maybe even ever. It's not a strong point guard class. And some guys in free agency they could look into a guy like Colin Sexton, who's a really good scorer, but defensively I don't know how well he fits with Bradley Beal. Porzingis also isn't a great defender. And another possible prospect is a John Wall return. You know, he's been rumored for a while, rumored for a while to leave the Rockets on a buyout, but he just continues to keep getting his money. But I think eventually he'll reach the point where he wants to play basketball again, because he's really not played that much basketball at all since leaving the Wizards, and he could return to the place where, you know, he made his career and where he will be remembered. Him and Beal have played together obviously a lot. I don't know how the new dynamic would be between those two, but I think that's definitely an option the Wizards may consider if he does become available this offseason. Another guy is Tyus Jones, who I really like. I would not be mad at all if my Knicks sign him. He's a really, really fundamentally sound point guard. He can hit open threes. He's a decent scorer, but really he's a good facilitator. And he's a good defender as well. I think he would fit well next to Beal, because he would set Beal up well, and he's not going to take a lot of shots away from Bradley Beal. And I do think his playmaking would really complement Beal well. Beal wouldn't need the ball in his hands, but he would still get his shots and get to his spots. And then there's some veteran options like a DeLon Wright or Ricky Rubio, maybe a stopgap if they do draft a point guard behind them. I think that's probably the most likely option for the Wizards right now with their cap situation. They're going to have to put a lot of money into Bradley Beal, which we talked about earlier. I do think he will re-sign. There's been a lot of talk about it, but I think he will re-sign. And so overall, the Wizards, this is going to be an interesting offseason to see which direction they go in. You know, they have the 10th overall pick. Last year wasn't good. They made a lot of moves last offseason with that Westbrook trade Obviously, they picked Corey Kispert, and they picked up guys like Kuzma. And then in free agency, they signed a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie. And they also acquired Aaron Holiday last year on draft night. Both those dudes who are not on the team anymore already. But you have Beal, you have Porzingis, you have two young centers in Daniel Gafford and Thomas Bryant. Thomas Bryant is pretty skilled, but he just can't stay healthy. Gafford's solid, but I could see them looking for an upgrade. They do really need a point guard, and they have these three young wings in Kispert, Hachimura, and Denny Avdia, who are all decent pieces, but neither one of them out of those three has really popped and show they can be more. The closest one has been Hachimura, but last year it was really puzzling, his situation. So, gonna be interested to see how the Wizards again try to make another run at building around Bradley Beal. They're probably going to have more new pieces again. And when will they reach the point where they feel like this just isn't working? We need to blow it up. Will that be soon, or is next year the year they finally break through?